was resting on its own coil, its eyes pointing at her ankles. How could she have been so stupid? How could she have allowed herself to be so exposed? She did not move. She slowly exhaled smoke through her nose, and maybe she'd made a noise of some kind, for the snake lifted its head and opened its white mouth, and Susan was sprinting back through the trees. And this is the moment it came to her as she watched the shadowed entryway of her father's parole officer's office. It hadn't occurred to her that what she was doing could be dangerous. This came as much a surprise to her as the warmth of the smiling waitress who appeared at her table and began to clear away the dirty plate and fork and half-empty cup. "Menu, sweetie?" The woman had dyed blonde hair, brown eyebrows, and large breasts. Wrapped around her hips was a soiled apron like she did some of the cooking too. Susan said no thank you and ordered iced tea. "You got it." The woman held the plate, fork, and cup in one hand and was wiping down the table with the other, but she kept staring at Susan, smiling at her. "Honey, you are gorgeous. You should be in the movies." Susan had heard this before, but only from a few boys who wanted what some of them got from her, never from a woman the age her mother would have been. Susan may have thanked her for her compliment, or maybe she didn't, but she sat there feeling sorry for herself. No, she sat there feeling the warm, fleshy presence of what she'd been denied. Her grandmother had never been big on compliments, and when it came to Susan's looks, it was always words of warning about not looking too trashy, about spending too much time on her hair and makeup, which she rarely spent much time on at all, on how tight her tops were, and she was too old to leave the house without wearing a bra. But never just a sincere compliment from a woman who'd been her age only 20 years earlier. Then through the window and up Canal Street, a man stepped out of that shadowed entryway into the sun. He was tall and thin and wore a tank top and sweatpants and sandals. From where Susan sat, he looked half black, too. She watched him turn and walk up the street. The waitress brought her iced tea and set it in front of her with lemon and packets of sugar. "Let me know if you need anything else, honey." She kept smiling down at her, taking her in as if she were a true gift to her day, and Susan smiled up at her and thanked her, and maybe that's when the anger started. There was how much she enjoyed this woman's attention, how surprised Susan was that she'd needed it. Why was she even here? It wasn't her father she'd needed at all. For over an hour she sat at that table. The last of the lunch customers, 3 old women speaking Greek or Italian on their way out the door, had gone, and Susan saw 2 more men come and go from Nicholas Anakis's entryway. The first was obese and wore loose gold chains around his neck, his hips rolling as he labored his way up to the street corner. That couldn't be him, could it? No, she felt nothing seeing him. Nothing. The second was in a white shirt and tie and suit pants and was probably her father's parole officer himself. He'd stepped out onto the sidewalk and smoked a cigarette. He had black hair cut as close as a cop's, and every few drags he'd point his face up at the sun and close his eyes. It made her want a cigarette too, and she ordered more tea and went out to the sidewalk and smoked one. Cars passed. The sun felt good on her face and arms. The man went back up the entryway's stairs, and she went back inside to her table. 2 men in summer suits walked by soon after that. They looked like bankers, or maybe she's just remembering that now as her older self writes this. It doesn't matter. But every man she saw was beginning to feel predatory to her in some way. A few minutes later, a beefy man in a blue t-shirt walked up the sidewalk on the other side of the street. His hair was tied back in a short ponytail, and he had the heavy brows of a boxer, and she hated him, even when he kept walking past Nicholas Anakis's entryway. The next morning, she sat at that same table, and that same warm waitress served her a poached egg and black coffee. 2 men in a booth kept staring at her.